Elena didn't realize that the heavy cast-iron key I kept in my desk drawer wasn't for a jewelry box or a diary. She watched me touch it every afternoon, running my thumb over the rusted bow, and she dismissed it as a sentimental relic of a man losing his grip on the present. If she had looked closer, she would have seen the stamped serial number of a federal evidence locker, a vault that contained the digitized records of every crooked bankruptcy filing in the tri-state area for the last 3 decades. But Elena was too busy decluttering my life, sliding my antique filing cabinets into the back of a junk truck while I was at my checkup. She thought she was erasing the paper trail of a tired old man. She didn't realize she was actually deleting her own exit strategy. I spent 30 years as a federal bankruptcy trustee, the man the court sends in when the lies stop working and the assets need to be hunted down. By the time she realized I wasn't the one who was lost, the federal marshal was already pulling into her driveway, and I was just sitting down for my tea. Welcome back to Payback Logs. Before we open the books on this betrayal, I have a quick question for you. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you enjoy watching a manipulator realize they've been outplayed by the very person they tried to silence? Also, drop a comment with the exact time you're watching this and the city or country you're tuning in from. It's always fascinating to see where our community is growing. Grab your snacks, settle in. This one is a slow burn with a very cold ending. I live in a house that breathes. It's a Victorian on the edge of town, full of dark oak wainscoting and the steady rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock that hasn't missed a beat since 1974. My life is measured in small, deliberate increments. I wake up, I wind the clock, and I brew a pot of loose-leaf tea. I like the weight of things, the way a heavy porcelain cup feels in your hand, the way a solid door sounds when it latches. My granddaughter, Sophie, is the light in these old rooms. She's 6 with a laugh that sounds like silver bells. We have a ritual every Saturday morning called the treasure hunt. We go out into the overgrown garden with a small trowel and a wooden box looking for valuable things. Sometimes it's a smooth river stone, sometimes a rusted washer from an old tractor, but to Sophie, everything we find is a piece of a larger story. "Is this a diamond, Grandpa?" she asked last Saturday, holding up a piece of clear quartz. "Better," I told her, tucking it into our box. "That's a piece of the Earth's memory. It's been here longer than the house." That piece was shattered when my daughter-in-law Elena started helping. Elena is a woman who moves with a sharp, frantic energy, always dressed in clothes that look like they're trying too hard to impress people she doesn't even like. She runs a boutique downtown, high-end, low inventory, the kind of place that sells lifestyle more than actual goods. She arrived while I was at a routine cardiology appointment. When I pulled my old truck into the gravel driveway, I didn't see the usual quiet. I saw a white box truck parked near the garage. I walked inside, the floorboards groaning under my boots. The den, my sanctuary, the room where I kept my professional library and 40 years of records, looked like it had been hit by a localized hurricane. 2 men were carrying my olive green filing cabinets toward the door. "What's going on here?" I asked. My voice isn't loud, but it has the gravelly authority of a man who has spent thousands of hours in a courtroom. Elena appeared from the hallway, dabbing at her forehead with a silk scarf. "Oh, Arthur, you're back early. I'm just doing some much-needed decluttering. All this old paper, it's a fire hazard, honey, and it's so dusty. I'm moving the essentials to a digital storage unit for you, and the rest is going to the shredder. We need to get you organized for the move." "The move?" I set my keys on the counter. The metal fob hit the stone with a sharp clack. "I didn't move, Elena." She gave me a thin, pitying smile, the kind people give to children or the very confused. "Arthur, please," she said, her voice dropping into that sugary, concerned tone that sets my teeth on edge. "You're getting agitated. The doctor said you need to avoid stress. I'm doing this for you. I have the papers you signed last week right here in my bag. You said you wanted me to take the burden off your shoulders." I looked at her. I looked at the men. I felt a cold, hollow sensation in the pit of my stomach. I hadn't signed anything, but Elena was looking at me with such conviction, such manufactured empathy, that for one split second I wondered if I'd actually forgotten. "I want them back in the den," I said, though my voice lacked its usual weight. "We'll talk about it after tea," she said, patting my arm. Her touch felt like a lizard's skin, dry and cold. I watched the truck pull away, taking a third of my professional history with me. I stood in the empty space where my cabinets had been, the smell of floor wax and ozone lingering in the air. I looked down at my hands. They were steady, but the house felt fragile. The first crack had appeared in the foundation, and Elena was already holding the sledgehammer. I closed the den door. I sat in the dark. I waited. The week that followed felt like walking through a thick, gray fog. Elena was at the house every day. She didn't wait for an invite. She simply used her spare key and let herself in, usually with a box of healthy pastries I didn't like and a stack of brochures for senior transition specialists. "Arthur, you forgot to turn the stove off again," she'd say, her voice echoing from the kitchen while I was upstairs. I'd walk down, confused, knowing I hadn't made anything since my morning toast. I'd find the burner glowing red, a small puddle of water boiling away in a pot I hadn't touched. "I'm worried, honey," she'd whisper, dabbing at her eyes. "The neighbors said you were wandering the garden at 3 a.m. You were looking for the books, they said. Do you remember that?" I hadn't been in the garden at 3 a.m. I had been asleep, dreaming of the rhythmic ticking of the clock. But she said it with such practiced sorrow, such a convincing mask of familial dread, that I found myself checking the mud on my slippers. I found myself looking in the mirror and wondering if the man staring back was finally starting to fray at the edges. "I've moved the rest of the downstairs files to the storage unit," she told me on Thursday, casually sipping her green juice. "It's better this way. You don't need to be burdened by the past. I've even started a legacy folder for you on the iPad. Everything is just a click away." I tried to use the iPad. I really did, but the password she gave me didn't work, and when I asked her about it, she sighed, a long, weary sound of a woman exhausted by a burden she never asked for. "I gave you the code 4 times yesterday, Arthur. It's Sophie's birthday, 061218. Try to keep up for her sake." The code didn't work. I felt a cold sweat prickle my neck. In my career, I've seen this play out 100 times. It's called capacity engineering. You create an environment of failure around a person until they surrender their autonomy just to make the confusion stop. I've seen trustees use it to seize corporate assets, and I've seen children use it to seize their parents' dignity. I sat in my chair that evening, the house feeling strangely empty without the weight of my filing cabinets. Elena had even taken the small brass scale that sat on my desk, a gift from the chief judge when I retired. "It's a dust magnet, Pop," she'd said. I looked at the grandfather clock. It was the only thing she hadn't touched. It was too heavy, too rooted. I realized that if I let her continue, I'd be just like that brass scale, gone, forgotten, and replaced by a modern version of my own life that I didn't recognize. She brought over a notary on Friday evening, a man named Silas with a weak chin and eyes that moved too fast. He had a stack of papers clipped to a board. "Just some medical proxy updates, Arthur," her hand resting heavily on my shoulder, "so I can talk to your doctors without all the red tape. You trust me, don't you?" I looked at the signature line. My hand felt heavy. I looked at Sophie, who was playing with her dolls on the rug. She looked up and smiled at me, a bright, honest smile that didn't have a single lie in it. "I'll sign it tomorrow, Elena," I said, my voice sounding tired than I felt. "I need my glasses. I think I left them upstairs." "I'll get them," she offered quickly. "No," I said, standing up. "I'll get them. I know exactly where they are." I walked upstairs, but I didn't go for my glasses. I went to the floorboard under my bed. I pulled back the rug and lifted the loose plank. Inside was a small black ledger, the one Elena hadn't found. I wrote down the date. I wrote down Silas's name. I wrote down the burner on the stove. I wasn't forgetting. I was documenting. And in a court of law, documentation is the only thing that survives the fire. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. The house stayed quiet after Elena and her jittery notary left. I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with a single lamp on, listening to the wind rattle the window panes. To keep my mind sharp, I reached for the one thing Elena's decluttering hadn't touched yet. A small, battered tin box hidden behind the flour canisters in the pantry. I opened it, and the scent hit me like a physical blow. Clara. It was the smell of peppermint tea and the faint, earthy aroma of the garden soil she loved so much. Inside were the things that didn't have a market value to a woman like Elena. Old theater stubs, a lock of our daughter's hair, and Clara's letters. Clara had a way of writing that made you feel the sun on your face, even on a Tuesday in November. I pulled out a letter dated October 1994. Arthur, the house is finally ours. No more liens, no more banks. We've built a fortress out of oak and patience. Promise me you'll never let the world turn our home into just another line on a spreadsheet. It's where our stories live. I ran my thumb over the texture of the paper, thick, cream-colored stationery. Clara had hand-stitched the quilts that still lay on the beds upstairs, every stitch a testament to her discipline. We hadn't inherited this life. We'd audited our way into it, saving every penny, avoiding the predatory interest rates of the 90s, and building an estate that was meant to protect Sophie's future. Elena saw Clara's quilts as dated textiles. She saw this house as equity trapped in brick. She didn't understand that when you spend 40 years as a bankruptcy trustee, you see the soul of a family in their assets. You see the sacrifice behind the silver and the labor behind the land. I remembered the night Clara asked. The room was filled with the scent of the lavender she grew in the backyard. She'd gripped my hand and whispered, "Keep the books balanced, Arthur. Don't let the shadows in." I realized then that Elena wasn't just a helper or even just a thief. She was the shadow Clara had warned me about. She was trying to liquidate Clara's memory before it had even finished cooling. By throwing away my files, she was trying to erase the evidence of the life we'd built so she could rebuild it in her own image, an image made of debt, vanity, and lifestyle boutiques. I sat there until the sun began to gray the edges of the sky. I looked at Clara's neat, looping handwriting one last time before tucking the letter into my breast pocket, right against my heart. I didn't feel like a confused old man anymore. I felt like the man who had overseen the liquidation of billion-dollar empires. I felt like the man who could find a hidden offshore account by the smell of the ink on a signature. "The books aren't balanced yet, Clara," I whispered to the empty kitchen, "but they will be." I stood up, my knees popping like dry kindling. I didn't need my glasses to see the path forward. I needed my tools. The sun wasn't even over the tree line when I moved. I didn't use the iPad Elena gave me. I used the old air-gapped terminal in the basement, the one I'd kept hidden behind a false wall of firewood. It was a relic, but it was clean, and it had a direct, encrypted line to the Pacer system and the National Bankruptcy Archives, the digital catacombs of every financial failure in American history. I started with Elena's boutique, L'Essence. On the surface, her social media showed a thriving business, but I don't look at likes. I look at schedules A and B. I looked at her UCC-1 filings, the public notices that tell the world who actually owns your equipment and inventory. Elena was underwater, deep. She had 3 merchant cash advances stacked on top of each other, a predatory lending spiral that would make a shark blush. But that wasn't the discovery that made my blood run cold. I found a series of quitclaim deeds filed in a neighboring county 3 weeks ago. Elena had used a forged power of attorney to transfer the title of my coastal property, the one Clara and I bought in 1982, into a shell corporation called E-Heritage Holdings. In the world of bankruptcy, we call this a fraudulent conveyance. She was moving the equity out of my name and into hers, thinking that because it was a different county, I'd never see the recording. She was stripping the house while I was still living in it. But I kept digging. I looked at her storage unit she mentioned. I used a GPS tracker I'd tucked into one of the filing cabinets before they took them, a small battery-powered puck I'd kept from a 2012 asset recovery case. The cabinets weren't in storage. They were at a local incinerator facility. She wasn't organizing my past. She was destroying the evidence of her own theft. I felt a cold, surgical calm settle over me. This wasn't just elder abuse. This was a systematic liquidation fraud. She was treating my life like a distressed company, and she had appointed herself the sole beneficiary of the restructuring. I began to build my own ledger of recacy. Preferential transfers, $42,000 moved from my savings to her business account. Asset stripping, the coastal property transfer. Breach of fiduciary duty, the forged medical proxy and power of attorney. I used the technical terminology I'd mastered over 30 years. I wasn't an old man anymore. I was a federal trustee conducting a Rule 2000 examination. I was looking through her life with a microscope, and I found the one thing she thought she'd buried: a pending involuntary bankruptcy petition filed against her by her own fabric suppliers. She was weeks away from total financial collapse. She wasn't just greedy, she was a cornered animal, and I was the one's throat she was trying to tear out to stay alive. I finished the audit at 8 a.m. I had enough evidence to trigger a Chapter 7 involuntary conversion that would strip her of every asset she owned, including the boutique. I printed the documents. The sound of the old dot matrix printer was a rhythmic mechanical scream in the basement. Zip, zip, zip. It sounded like the world's fastest guillotine. I tucked the papers into Clara's tin backs. I walked upstairs, made a fresh pot of peppermint tea, and waited for Elena to arrive with her healthy pastries. I had the audit. I had the paper trail. I was ready to pull the trigger. But then Sophie came over on Saturday morning for our treasure hunt, and the world shifted beneath my feet again. We were out by the old hydrangea bushes when Sophie pulled a small, laminated card from her pocket. It was a gold member card for Elena's boutique, L'Essence. "Look, Grandpa," she said, her voice small and proud. "Mommy said I'm a partner now. She said this card means I'm helping her keep the store open." I took the card from her small hand. My fingers brushed against the plastic, and I felt a cold prickle of dread. I turned it over. On the back, in tiny silver embossed print, was an account number. I recognized the prefix immediately. It wasn't a membership number. It was the routing code for a specialized Uniform Transfers to Minors Act, UTMA account. Specifically, it was Sophie's college trust fund, the one Clara and I had started the day she was born. I went back inside while Sophie was distracted by a butterfly. I didn't use the basement terminal this time. I used the secured iPad Elena had given me, knowing she'd see the login. I wanted her to see it. I logged into the trust portal using the credentials I'd memorized years ago. The balance was 42 cents. Elena hadn't just moved my money. She had pledged Sophie's entire trust as collateral to a high-interest bridge loan to keep her boutique's lights on for another 30 days. She had turned her own daughter into a secondary victim of her vanity. In the world of federal bankruptcy, this is more than just fraud. It's a breach of trust that carries criminal referrals. She had gambled her child's future on a failing lifestyle brand. She had looked at her daughter's education and seen nothing but a line of credit. I felt a roar in my ears that sounded like a freight train. My hand gripped the edge of the kitchen counter so hard the wood groaned. I looked out the window at Sophie. She was kneeling in the dirt, carefully placing a treasure into our wooden box. She was so innocent, so completely unaware that the person who was supposed to protect her was the one picking her pockets. The treasure hunt wasn't a game to Elena. It was a scavenge. She was stripping the meat off the bones of 2 generations to buy herself another month of social standing. I didn't cry. I haven't cried since the day we buried Clara. Instead, I felt my mind lock into an absolute predatory focus. I was no longer a grandfather being managed. I was a federal officer protecting a minor's estate. I picked up the phone and made a call to a man named Miller. Miller was a senior auditor for the U.S. trustee program, a man I'd trained 20 years ago. "Miller," I said, my voice as cold and flat as a tombstone. "It's Arthur. I need an emergency ex parte motion for a temporary restraining order. I've got a fiduciary in the field who is actively dissipating a minor's trust. I'm sending you the ledger now. I want a freeze and seize on every account tied to Elessence and E-Heritage Holdings." "Arthur? Is that you? We heard you were, well, Elena said you were struggling." "Elena is a debtor in possession who hasn't realized she's already bankrupt, Miller. I'm not struggling. I'm auditing. Get the papers ready. I'm bringing her in tomorrow." I hung up. I walked back out to the garden. I knelt in the dirt next to Sophie. "Did you find something good, Grandpa?" she asked. "The best thing, Sophie," I said, tucking a small silver coin, a real one I'd kept in my pocket, into her box. "I found the truth, and the truth is going to make everything right." If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. Thank you, for real. The trap I constructed for Elena was a classic involuntary bankruptcy conversion. In my 30 years on the bench, I'd seen thousands of debtors try to hide assets in shells, but Elena made the mistake of thinking I was a victim, not the architect of the system she was trying to cheat. I didn't stop her from moving the last of my liquid cash. In fact, I made it easy for her. I left a draft of a new will on my desk, one that appeared to name her the sole executor and beneficiary of my entire estate. I knew she'd find it. I knew she'd see it as the green light to finish her restructuring. But that document was a honeypot. Tucked inside the metadata of the digital copy she inevitably scanned was a beacon tag, a forensic tool used by the U.S. Trustee's Office to track the movement of sensitive legal documents. The moment she uploaded that will to her business server to show her creditors that a windfall was coming, she effectively invited a federal auditor into her encrypted files. Layer 1. The judicial freeze. I used Miller to file an emergency petition under 11 U.S.C. Section 303. Since Elena had more than 12 creditors she wasn't paying, I only needed 3 of them to sign on. I called the fabric suppliers she'd stiffed. They were more than happy to help me put her into involuntary liquidation. Layer 2. The fraudulent transfer clawback. Under Section 548 of the Bankruptcy Code, a trustee can reach back and void any transfer made with the intent to hinder, delay, or defraud creditors. By moving my coastal property into E-Heritage Holdings, Elena hadn't secured the asset. She had tagged it with a federal lien, made it impossible to sell or leverage. Layer 3, the poisoned asset. I discovered a collection of rare coins in the attic and told Elena I wanted them sold to help her boutique. I even gave her the provenance papers. What I didn't tell her was that those coins were already registered in a federal asset forfeiture database from an old case I'd handled. The moment she tried to auction them, it would trigger an automatic red flag at the Department of Justice. I sat in my kitchen on Sunday morning, watching the sunrise. I felt a strange sense of peace. I wasn't an old man being managed by a greedy daughter-in-law. I was a statutory trustee executing a liquidation plan. I had given her every opportunity to stop. I had given her the chance to be the woman Clara hoped she would be. But Elena only saw equity. She didn't see the lives behind the numbers. The trap was set. The order for relief had been signed by a judge in the middle of the night. Elena thought she was heading into her biggest social event of the year, a luxury lifestyle gala at her boutique. She thought she was going to announce her expansion. She didn't know that I was the one who had invited the guests of honor. I put on my best suit, the charcoal one I wore to my retirement party. I checked the heavy cast-iron key in my pocket. It was time to go to work. The Essence Boutique was a cathedral of glass, chrome, and overpriced vanity. Tonight, it was filled with the local elite, men in Italian loafers and women draped in the very lifestyle Elena was selling. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the hum of self-congratulatory chatter. Elena was in her element, wearing a dress that probably cost 3 months of my mortgage, holding a champagne flute like a scepter. "Arthur!" she exclaimed, her voice hitting that high artificial register as I walked in. "You made it, and you're wearing your suit. Doesn't he look dapper, everyone? My father-in-law is finally coming out of his shell." A few people offered polite, dismissive nods. To them, I was just a prop in Elena's narrative of the dutiful, caring daughter. "I wouldn't miss this for the world, Elena," I said. My voice was low, resonant, and carried across the room in a way that made a few people stop talking. "It's not every day you see a liquidation of this magnitude." Elena's smile faltered just for a second. "Liquidation? Arthur, honey, you're confused again. This is an expansion gala. We're announcing the new showroom tonight." "Is that right?" I asked. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a stack of blue-backed legal documents, the order for relief and the notice of involuntary conversion. Because according to the United States Bankruptcy Court for the Eastern District, Essence is no longer under your control. As of 4:15 p.m. today, this business has been converted to a Chapter 7 liquidation. The room went silent. The only sound was the bubbles popping in Elena's glass. What is this?" she hissed, stepping closer to me. "Arthur, stop this. You're embarrassing yourself. You're sick." "I'm not sick, Elena. I'm a retired bankruptcy trustee. And for the last 3 weeks, I've been conducting a forensic audit of your books. I found the $42,000 you siphoned from my savings. I found the forged deeds for my coastal property. And I found what you did to Sophie's trust fund." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sterling, her business partner, stepped forward, his face ashen. "Elena, what trust fund? You said that collateral was from a private equity injection." "She lied, Sterling," I said, turning to him. "She pledged a 6-year-old's college education to cover a margin call on her showroom lease. That's not disruptive equity. That's a breach of fiduciary duty and aggravated identity theft." "Arthur, shut up," Elena screamed. The mask was gone. The dutiful daughter was replaced by a woman whose world was melting. "You can't do this. You don't know what you're talking about. You're a senile old man who can't even remember to turn off the stove." "Oh, I remembered the stove, Elena. Just like I remembered to install the hidden cameras in the kitchen that recorded you turning it on while I was upstairs. I have the footage of you decluttering my files into an incinerator truck, and I have the metadata from the forged will you tried to upload to your server this afternoon." I looked toward the glass entrance. 2 men in windbreakers with U.S. Marshal stenciled in gold on the back walked through the door, accompanied by Miller. "Elena Thorne?" He held up a badge. "I'm with the U.S. Trustee Program. I'm here to execute a seizure and inventory order. This premises is now under the control of the court-appointed receiver. All guests are requested to exit immediately." The panic was instantaneous. The elite of the city scrambled for the door like rats off a sinking ship. Elena stood in the center of the room, her champagne glass slipping from her hand and shattering on the white marble floor. "You can't do this," she whimpered, looking at the marshals. "It's my business. I built this." "You built it on sand, Elena," I said, walking toward the door. I stopped and looked back at her. She looked small against the backdrop of her chrome shelves. "In my world, there are no lifestyles. There are only assets and liabilities. And right now, Elena, your liabilities just caught up with you." I handed the heavy cast-iron key to Miller. "The evidence locker serial number is on the back. Everything you need to send her to a federal grand jury is in box 402, including the original deeds she thought she burned this afternoon." Miller nodded. "We've got it from here, Arthur. Go home. Get some rest." I walked out of the boutique. The air outside was cool and smelled like rain. I didn't feel the stress the doctor warned me about. I felt a lightness in my chest that I hadn't felt since before the decluttering began. The books weren't just balanced, they were closed. It's been 6 months since the glass shattered at the Elescence Gala. The federal courts don't care about lifestyle or social standing. They care about the movement of capital. Elena's boutique was liquidated within 90 days. The chrome shelves sold for scrap, and the designer inventory auctioned off to pay back the fabric suppliers she'd tried to ruin. She's currently serving a 36-month sentence in a minimum security federal facility for bankruptcy fraud and aggravated identity theft. She's finally decluttering, though I suspect a 10 by 10 cell wasn't exactly the minimalist aesthetic she had in mind. The coastal property is back in my name, the fraudulent deeds vacated by a summary judgment. More importantly, the $84,000 in Sophie's trust fund was recovered through a clawback action against Elena's boutique accounts. The law has a long reach when a trustee is the one pointing the way. I'm sitting in my den now. The filing cabinets are back, new ones made of heavy steel bolted to the floor. The smell of old paper and wood wax has returned, and it's the most comforting scent in the world. Sophie and I finished our treasure hunt this morning. We found a small brass button near the hydrangea bushes. "Is this a pirate's gold, Grandpa?" she asked, her eyes wide with the same wonder that Elena never understood. "It's a piece of the truth, Sophie," I told her, "and the truth is the only treasure that never loses its value." I've started teaching her how to keep a ledger. Nothing complex, just a small notebook where she records the things we find and the dates we found them. I want her to understand that her story is hers to write, and that no one, not even family, has the right to erase the ink. I look at the grandfather clock. Its steady tick-tock is the heartbeat of this house. It's a reminder that time is the ultimate auditor. It exposes the pretenders and preserves the builders. I take a sip of my peppermint tea. It's hot, sharp, and tastes like Clara's garden. I touch the heavy cast-iron key in my pocket one last time before I place it back in the desk drawer. I don't need to carry it anymore. The vault is secure. The house is quiet. The birds are singing in the oaks. The books are balanced. I think I'll go sit on the porch now and watch the sunset over the garden Clara planted. The work is done. The legacy is safe. And for the first time in a long time, the silence in this house feels exactly the way it should. Peaceful. The log is closed. This concludes the payback log for the bankruptcy trustee's revenge. Would you like to begin a new narrative from the remaining titles, or do you have a specific professional weapon in mind?